right, so you give the new guy the first talk after lunch, so after a big meal, I guess I'll try and keep this entertaining. So thanks for the intro. It's good to be here this afternoon. Like I said, we're going to go through how we built our infrastructure measurement non-for-profit. So we're going to talk about our team. Our three members are here today. Want to go over our operations, what a vantage point is, our definition of a vantage point, the signals we produce. All of our data is publicly available for your use. And at the end, we'll go through a few use cases of some of our more popular signals. I think most of you know John Kristoff. He's been heavily involved in the internet community for a lot of time. Matt Kemp is here. He's another founder of DataPlane with us. We worked at DePaul in the early 2000s. John and Matt were on the network team. I worked on the network security team. We've been other organizations since then. This is kind of our side gig. We have day jobs, but this is something we do. It's interest to us and something to give back to the community. So a little bit about the beginning of DataPlane. John's been doing designing, compiling feeds for over 12 years, nonprofit and commercial use. And his experience, he had two main models for gathering data. The first is through volunteers. He built relationships. He asked people to donate feeds, give them their data. He'd do the analysis on the back end. Or he developed an ISO, delivered it to them with the necessary apps and packages, and they ran it on their network. It was a cost-effective model, got him a lot of good data, but there were problems with this. Processes would stop. People would leave the organization, systems would go down, so it presented a lot of challenges. Another model he looked to do was a disposable system. So we'd send it out to the organization, volunteer-based again. All they need is power and network connectivity. Then he could manage the boxes remotely, gather data, do his analysis. Challenges with this, it was costly. Acquiring, purchasing, developing the systems, getting them out to places created some challenges as well. So his next step was to create his own sensor network, leveraging providers throughout the globe. And so in 2016, he started DataPlane.org for a hobby and also to support his ongoing doctoral research. Gave him full control of the hosts. He was able to gather data, and he looked to get some global diversity with his hosts out there. He was doing that for a while, and he started about thinking closing up shop. It was getting a little much. And then people started reaching out and say, how's your work going with DataPlane? We like what you're doing. He was a little surprised. He got some small donations. Some commercial organizations reached out and said, hey, we're using this feed. We'd really like you to continue your work. So he saw a lot of opportunity for growth, but he knew he needed some help. So he reached out to Matt, and he reached out to me to see if we wanted to join up, co-found a nonprofit with DataPlane so we can keep this going. So Matt and I joined earlier in the year. Matt brings a lot of business, technical, and creative skills to the group. And the biggest one was redesign of the website, so that was one of his first steps. Our mission, you'll see on our website, is for operators by operators. We want to focus on education and research. We're looking to foster a more robust, healthier internet through data analysis. And we want to improve, network operations, giving you raw data, and for you to, look at measuring internet activity, analyzing trends, supporting research. So we like the tech stuff. That's what we do. We like the research. We like the analysis. But starting a nonprofit, there's a lot we didn't know in the legal and financial arenas. So we knew we needed help to start out. So we engaged with an attorney, set up our articles of corporation. That's a formal document giving the name, the organization, its purpose. Well, we're the founding directors. And then our lawyer acted as our register agent, set it up through the Illinois State Secretary of State office. And in April 2022, we were formally DataPlane.org NFP and received approval for a 501c3 organization. We're defined as a charitable organization with an educational purposes. some basic rules we had to follow. We had to have a board, which we're a 3-member board now. Our role is to focus on overseeing the annual budget, set strategic goals. We can't have any private interest, no legislated or political campaigns, and then we have some annual reporting obligations. Also looking for tax-exempt status, which is helpful for write-offs. It also getting nonprofit, it opens us up for some discounts and some grants when we're looking for some tools and working with other organizations. We're also looking at a for-profit arm, and well, why would we want to do this? We're currently working with some European organizations where they want something specific in a feed, so we're looking to build signals for them, and that might jeopardize our nonprofit status. So one of our thoughts is if we do a for-profit section, those funds will help us pay our expenses on the nonprofit side and all our expenses there. For some financial considerations, we are a self-funded organization. As I mentioned, this tax exempt, the write-offs, that's going to be helpful. Anything to help keep costs down. Our current operating expenses, we run in about the mid 5-digit range. Costs that we encounter is office rent, legal and accounting services, DNS services, errand services, but the bulk is all of our hosting provider relationships. Getting our banking accounts, credit cards up and running, PayPal for, paying our accounts receivable. Some of the lessons learned we had so far is, setting up the banking accounts, hidden fees. Again, so we really got to be cost conscious, making sure we're doing things in a smart way so we don't have to pay unnecessary fees. We got to move hundreds of providers that we've accumulated over the years into an accounting system. We have to be better tracking of our monthly, our annual expenses. Our basic lawyer services, that was our initial reach out to him, but we know we're going to need more help for tech-related legal issues and international law as we expand, so we'll be looking to get into that. And then there's always small surprises. One small one, we had a physical office space we brought up, and we got a notice and we had to move out in 5 days. So all our legal documentation already has an old address, so we got to move that. So now I want to talk about our network here. So what is a vantage point? I'll give us our definition of vantage points. They're Linux-based systems with at least one v4 address. It has no purposeful intent to attract unsolicited traffic other than just being on the internet. We want to see what's happening out there. Primary goal is to provide insight into internet behavior and activity. They're minimal Debian-based systems. That's our ideal platform. It's well supported, popular OS, and most of the providers have that as an option. All of our development's been around Debian. Average specs on our host, just 1 gig of RAM, 10 gig disk space, CPU, KVM for virtualization. And our vantage points, they're all set up for a beacon. We set that hourly to check in for availability and uptime. We have 2 types of vantage points. One we call a sensor. A sensor runs low interaction network service listener. It's not a honeypot. We never operate on the false pretense that a remote system or user has gained access to the server or the system itself. The sensor engages in protocol and service handshakes, to characterize communications and understand intent. The probes on there, they periodically originate low-impact network service traffic. Evaluates connectivity, reachability, and responses of measures paths. For right now, we only have 1 probe, but we're looking at developing more and getting them out there. The sensors, must have 1 v4 address. We prefer and like to have a v6 when we can get it. And probes should have a v4 and a v6 address. All the results from the sensors hit a back-end collection AGC over a TLS syslog back channel. The vantage points don't contain any code, data, no results that would jeopardize our operations. They're basically a disposable system. If one goes down or we lose it, we don't really get any major harm to our operations. One drawback we have is we don't see our target attacks. If something doesn't come across our sensors, we don't see it. So here's a global view of our network. It gives you a reasonable representation of where we're located. We have a presence in 6 continents, 61 countries. We have over 300 vantage points. We're in 110/8 networks. We use mostly low-end providers. We're working with about 100 plus providers. There's a premium cost usually where locations where power, IP addressing, and space is limited. What do we look for in a provider selection? Financial, we need to be cost conscious. That's where the low-end providers are attractive. Premium providers are great, but they come with higher costs, so we usually tend to lean towards the lower providers. PayPal is our payment method for most of these when we can. Protects us a little bit, minimizes information disclosure. Costs for the hosts. We do have some free ones through special deals. We have some really cheap ones for maybe $3 a year. But on average, we're looking at $30 per year to $400 per year per host. As you would expect, support and availability varies amongst providers. And once our financial support grows, we're hoping to have maybe a bigger footprint in some premium providers for more reliability. With the location, we know the internet activity, varies depending on, where the measurements are and where the activity's taking place. So we really want to look for a diverse environment, both geographically, globally, and in the internet system. We look to get as much coverage in countries and /8s that we can. And we're mainly in metro areas. We really don't have any home or mobile networks, but that is something we're interested in getting into in the future. The reputation of providers can vary. We're looking for someone a little established, not someone that just popped up overnight. Some have their own IP address blocks, but many are associated with their IPs are associated with the upstream provider. That's fine until they have to change upstream providers, and that's hit us before where they do a forklift, and we have a lot of work to bring them back up. For management support, we don't need much. We're looking for out-of-band console interface, ability to reboot, reinstall when we need. Most of those are offered everywhere. We know stuff happens out there, but we do expect a reasonable response to a support ticket so we can work on getting our hosts back online. Some of our challenges with the providers, as mentioned, if we went premium, our costs would double, triple. That's not something we can handle right now. We do have some regional challenges, like China and Pakistan, for example. You have to register, you have to prove who you are. They ask what you are doing. You're kind of limited sometimes in what we can do. Another recent one, we did have some Russian hosts, so we had some internal debate. We reached out some feedback from others, what to do with the war in Ukraine and the sanctions. So at the time, we decided to, take down those sensors. We'll probably reevaluate that in the future. I talked about the availability. This is just basic graph. The top line is all our beacons checking in, except for one provider where we had tens of hosts in that provider. The bottom graph is just that provider availability. Those are our beacons checking in. This is when they had to change their upstream provider. We were offline for a while. Took a lot of work to get stuff back up. Some of the peaks later on might have been us rebooting and bringing up sensors, but that's a pain. That's a reality that we have to deal with. So our sensor management's pretty basic. Kind of have 3 steps to get a sensor up. Install the OS at the provider. Like I said, it's a minimal Debian install. SSH public key authentication, disable password authentication. We deploy all the apps to the sensors with Ansible. And then we have to set up logging, back to our central collector with the TLS connection. We prefer syslog NG. We like its robust features and we're familiar with it. We have certs on the sensor and the collector, so have some reasonable expectation that they know each other. We really don't actively monitor our sensors other than the beacon. Not a lot of system management. They pretty much run with little intervention, unless there's a big forklift change on the provider side. We have a really standard approach, but we do run in things with providers where we have to do some additional configuration or steps based on their scripts. If they're dealing with NAT, we may have to do some config changes. If they use some cloud-based scripts, we may have to go in and clean it up. We might have to do some manual checks afterwards to make sure they didn't overwrite any of our, our base configurations. We try and be as consistent as we can with our setups, but sometimes a provider might make that a little challenging. So I'll talk a little bit about our signals. Currently we have DNS, V6, SIP, SMTP, SSH, Telnet, and VNC. All these signals are out on our website. They're available for public use. They all leverage an application listener to produce the intelligence data. For some apps like SSH, we have a customized version of OpenSSH. The other listeners are specifically written for data plane, instead of using a full protocol implementation. The daemons support enough to interpret the unsolicited requests, log the application-specific details. All of our signals can be found on our GitHub repository, so if you wanted to check that out, that's available. We do emphasize that our signals are not block lists. They're good for alerts and warnings. It's good to highlight things in your address space, but you got to keep in mind that all the traffic may not necessarily be malicious. Some examples, why not the block? We do see a lot of scanners or survey projects that hit our signals. DNS queries, it could be victims that are spoofed and they're going to show up in our list. We have one example of a legitimate organization. We're surveying the internet and they reached out to us because they were on our signal list and they asked to be removed. And we politely talked to them and said, our point of our signals is show all the internet activity. So we, decided to keep them in there. We didn't want to get into the habit of having to, clean up our list based on, good guys out there. We just wanted to have the data out there for people to interpret and do their analysis. Some basic info on our signals. Entries expire after 7 days if it hasn't been seen. We update them hourly. They show the most recent event outside of our SSH ID password pairs signal. We do have the source port information, but that's not publicly available. We know that's useful, especially with NATs and proxies. When an address shows in a signal, it's always good to look at a composite view instead of just one single signal, kind of similar to IP reputation scores where you're looking at variables to determine if it's useful or not. Correlating events across our signals usually gets us a much deeper insight. UDP-based signal, might be spoofed, so not necessarily something that indicates it's malicious, other than it's being abused in some other way. We're planning on more delayed data sets with some of our data in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about our three of our more popular ones, our SSH signals, our DNS signals, and our RPA monitor. Most of our signals, you're going to get an ASN number, your ASN name, the IP address, the last seen date. So for the SSH client connection, these are the protocol negotiations and the handshakes that we log. We don't log any scans. The password auth signal, that's anything that attempts with credentials that we can grab. That's a smaller subnet of the client connection signal. And then we have our SSH ID password pairs to show that what we see coming across the wire. So our DNS signal, a lot of really good data coming in DNS queries. Right now we have 4 signals out there for public digestion. As I mentioned, some others, we do have a richer set of data that we don't disclose for the public view. We do look for people running research projects. If we need to, share some of that data, we'd love to hear from you. As you expect, you would see a lot of spoof queries over DNS. So we do set the truncate bit for all UDS queries. We're hoping to see if it comes back over TCP, and that'll give us some, a data set that we can look at and analyze. We don't see that happening too often. So the first one we have is DNS recursion. We're not a named server. No one should be looking at us. So if we we see this, we know someone's trying to make a query and they're really looking for an answer. They're trying to make us do the work, so that's interesting information for us to see. We have a DNS recursion desired with internet class and any record type. These aren't typical queries, so we're looking for information for an amplification attack, possible malicious intent on that one. DNS over TCP, that's internet activity we want to see. A side note, John co-authored a RFC 2219 DNS transport over TCP. It's a good read. He talks about some reasons not to filter DNS over TCP. So that's dear to his heart, grabbing that information. The last one for the DNS, we have any queries with the chaos class and text record. Bind uses a chaos class to retrieve version information. So someone possibly mapping for version information for future use. Here's one of our signals. All of our signals have graphs to show trends over time. Here's our DNS TCP one, just to give an example. And we obviously saw a big spike that happened over this signal. We weren't expecting that. So after digging in, it was pretty easy to find the sensor that was, caused the spike. So we knew something was happening on. We looked into it and saw all of the queries here. We analyzed it and found out that the IP we were given for this host was previously used for organization's name server. So we were getting all their traffic stale record. We reached out to the provider, summarized the problem. They responded pretty quickly, updated the glue record to point it to another address. We did a more detailed analysis in our newsletter that's out there for viewing. We also have rpkidataplane.org. It's acting as a publication point under Aaron's Trust Anchor. So we're able to get data here. So for our first graph on the RPK monitor, this is all unique addresses that are using RRDP or rsync to hit our publication point. And we saw a big spike that was actually self-inflicted. Our web server host there was getting overwhelmed. RRDP was over HTTPS, and that will default to rsync if it's not available. Here's where we're just monitoring all the RP software implementations that are hitting our publication point, all the various vendors and their software versions. So to end up, so we talk about a lot of our work is research. We have a monthly newsletter that we encourage you to reach out to and look at. Thanks for he's not playing music to walk me off the stage. And we have a lot of future plans. Just some. We're looking at listening on all ports, working with net flows. We want to do some active measuring for performance analytics. We want to prepare to use our /24 address space. Some DDoS attacks, RDP, HTTP. We're looking to get into. Been in discussion with a lot of people in the security, routing, and DNS communities on possible signals that they want to see. So we're really interested in looking to expand. Thanks for your attention. Hope this will add value to your work. As I mentioned many times, our data is publicly available. We'd love to hear what you want to see. If you visit our site, gather information, you can see us on Twitter. We have a lot of our information up on GitHub, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for your time.